Yo, today, I want to explore the possibility of Rockstar Games making a Red Dead Redemption 3. And who should be the protagonist? There are many contenders. Now, I absolutely loved the emotional roller coaster of Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2's incredible prequel story following the Van Der Linde gang. But after those two massive epics, where could a potential Red Dead 3 even go story-wise? At the end of RDR1, we saw John Marston's tragic demise, leaving his son Jack as the surviving member of the Marston family. While the credits rolled on Jack riding off into the sunset seeking revenge, I was immediately gripped by the narrative potential here. What if Red Dead 3 picked up the story with a time jump, putting us in control of Jack as a young adult on the frontier? I think setting Red Dead 3 around the 1910s or early 1920s could be the perfect evolution of the series' familiar Wild West setting while allowing for some fascinating new storytelling angles. By this point, Jack would be coming of age as the quintessential disillusioned outlaw, potentially hardened by years seeking vengeance over his father's death. The core open world could still heavily feature classic frontier towns and sweeping frontier vistas. But the encroaching industrialization and urban sprawl of the early 20th century could provide a sense of the modern world slowly infringing on the mythologized Wild West era. I absolutely loved Red Dead 2's grounded historical portrayal, so weaving in recognizable events like World War I could create an intriguing backdrop. Narratively, Jack being caught between his attachment to fading outlaw ways and the rapid societal shifts transforming the nation could make for captivating inner conflict and character growth. Maybe he ends up getting ensnared in the underground whiskey trade of the newly begun Prohibition period as his quest for retribution takes unexpected turns. I'd love to see Jack evolve from a directionless, revenge-driven drifter into a complex, multidimensional hero, grappling with the need to adapt to an evolving nation, closing the door on the classic Western age his father embodied. The rich potential for shows as his individualistic path clashes with the industrialized future could reach epic narrative heights. Of course, part of me is selfishly hoping we could even get to reunite with some legendary RDR2 characters like the aging uncle or Charles making cameos to tie the storylines together. Or imagine cult favorite characters like Seth bringing their signature insanity into the new Prohibition setting. The possibilities are endless. What do you folks think? Does a Prohibition-era Red Dead 3 starring Jack Marston excite you as much as it does me? Or should Rockstar take the series in a completely different direction? I'm certainly starved for another chapter in this masterfully crafted Wild West universe. But if you prefer old times, then how about Landon Ricketts? For those who don't remember, Ricketts was the experienced gunslinger who helped John Marston take down the Mexican army in the first game. Despite being an older fella, dude was an absolute crackshot and all-around badass. So could Ricketts carry his own game as the main protagonist? On one hand, I think it could be pretty darn cool to experience the Wild West through the eyes of a seasoned, battle-hardened gunman like him. Just imagine getting to tap into Ricketts' lifetime of frontier knowledge and sharpshooting skills. Exploring the open world as this grizzled, been-there-done-that kind of guy could be awesome. We'd get to see his perspective on how the Old West is slowly fading while creating our own legend. Plus, Ricketts already has an intriguing backstory established, like his apparent ties to Dutch's gang when they were active. Diving deeper into his mysterious past connections to characters like Dutch could reveal some juicy new narrative angles. However, the biggest issue I can see is the time period they'd need to set a Ricketts-led game in. By the events of Red Dead Redemption, dude was already up there in years. So unless they went with a prequel setup, he might be a bit too old and immobile to work smoothly as an open-world protagonist. A younger Ricketts game could hit that sweet spot though. Maybe they could explore his origin story of becoming a renowned gunman while the Wild West was still in its prime. I'd love to see how he built his reputation through epic gunfights and outlaw adventures. The other route could be aging Ricketts down just a bit from his Red Dead 1 appearance to make him still spry enough for open-world hijinks. Like imagine him as a grumpy but highly capable mentor taking a younger gunslinging protege under his wing. Honestly, now that I'm talking it out, there's definitely some cool gameplay potential in taking the reins as a distinguished gunslinger legend like Landon Ricketts. Just seeing the hard-bitten state of the rapidly modernizing frontier through his disillusioned eyes could be compelling as hell, but they'd need to be crafty about the time period and setup to make sure gameplay wasn't too limited by his seasoned age, you know? An origin story seems greenlit, while directly continuing from Red Dead 1's events might be tough to pull off smoothly. In any case, I'd be totally down to run around an open world packed with seedy saloons and gunslingers to take down as the one and only Landon Ricketts. Rockstar would just need to find that sweet spot period and framing to fully unleash his certified badass potential. What do you folks think? Could Ricketts carry the gunsmoke-filled main event? If we are talking older times, Dutch could be the guy. Now, Dutch was definitely one of the most fascinating and complex characters we encountered in the Red Dead Redemption series. As the charismatic leader of the Van Der Linde gang, he charmed and manipulated his way into becoming a notorious outlaw. But there's still so much about Dutch's backstory and rise to power that remains a big mystery. We only got little glimpses into his past and how he rallied his crew of hired guns together over the years. And by the end, his eventual descent into total madness and betrayal left a lot of unanswered questions too. So on that note, making Dutch the playable protagonist of a potential Red Dead Redemption 3 could definitely work from a narrative standpoint. We could explore his entire origin story, how he went from a young, ambitious guy to the criminal mastermind running that fearsome gang. It'd be awesome getting inside Dutch's head to understand how his idealistic goals and philosophies first took root, and how they became so drastically twisted over time into justifying heinous acts. Watching his gradual unraveling that we briefly saw in Red Dead 2 could make for one wild character study. They could double down on Dutch's cult leader-esque charm and ability to seduce people into following him too. Developing connections with future gang members like John, Javier, Bill could add lots of compelling human dimensions amidst all the outlaw antics. The gameplay potential would be there too. As the up-and-coming outlaw boss, you could recruit new gang members, plan and execute epic heists and robberies, and build up Dutch's notoriety as one of the most feared criminals in the West. But the obvious downside is that we already know how Dutch's story ultimately ends, with him going full unhinged villain. So, any game following his exploits may feel a bit like an extended prologue in that sense. There's not a whole lot of dramatic uncertainty about where his path inevitably leads. Another wrinkle is the time period they could set it in. Dutch was already grizzled and middle-aged by 1899 in Red Dead Redemption 2, so they might need to push his origin tale back a few decades to have him in his prime outlaw days, though that could risk making the setting feel too antiquated. All that said, I do think there's a ton of potential in letting players rise through the ranks and walk a mile in Dutch's boots, at least in his earlier, more redeemable days as a charismatic Robin Hood-type figure. Just seeing his gradual descent from hoping to make the world more ideal into cowardly self-preservation by any means could make for a gut-punching downward spiral. But Rockstar would need to be crafty about the framing and time period to avoid the story feeling like too much of an extended epilogue, if that makes sense. As long as they strike that balance, though, Dutch is a captivating enough character to build an entire new Red Dead prequel around in my books. What do you folks think? Make it happen, or leave the past buried? Now let's talk about the possibility of Hosea Matthews leading the charge as the main playable character, if Rockstar decided to make another Red Dead game. Now, for those who may have forgotten, Hosea was the older gentleman advisor and sort of consigliere figure to Dutch Van Der Linde's gang in Red Dead Redemption 2. Despite being up there in years, he was savvy, level-headed, and one of the few voices of reason amidst all the chaos and outlawry. On the surface, making Hosea the central protagonist could seem like an odd choice. He's not exactly the gunslinging roughneck type you'd expect to anchor a rough-and-tumble Wild West adventure game. However, looking deeper, I think there's actually some really fascinating potential in playing as a grizzled, world-weary old hand like Hosea. His combination of wisdom, lifetime of experiences, and cunning deception skills could open up very unique gameplay possibilities. Instead of just blazing a trail of violence, you might blend into towns and civilizations using aliases and con artistry to swindle your way into high-stakes heists. Hosea's talents for meticulous planning and smooth talking could necessitate more methodical, almost Hitman-esque mission sandboxes to navigate. It'd also be interesting to see his perspective as a former successful con man turned disillusioned mentor, desperately trying to impart his philosophy and street smarts onto the unruly Dutch and his volatile gang. We'd get a front-row seat to the quiet tragedies that gradually disillusioned Hosea until his dying days. From a storytelling point of view, they could easily frame the narrative as an origin tale following young Hosea's rise from a scrappy orphan or street urchin to becoming that crafty grifter and criminal mastermind down the line. His eventual crossing of paths with the Van Der Linde gang could mark the story's climax. That said, the obvious hurdle is again making an older gentleman the central character in such an action-driven open-world setting, without it feeling too limited or lackluster on the excitement front. A portion focusing on Hosea in his prime grifting days could counteract this while providing an intriguing downward character arc to his eventual fate. Ultimately, while the straight-shooting, gruff gunslinger may seem like the obvious protagonist choice for a Red Dead game, I honestly think the devious-minded Hosea Matthews could make for a captivating lead perspective. Just imagine the potential for inventive, almost Deus Ex-like mission sandboxes where Academy Award-level deception and environmental mastery is prioritized over brute force. Seeing the world of outlaws and civilization clash through the lens of that aged, somewhat aristocratic hustler turned conflicted mentor could provide both awesome gameplay diversity and heavy narrative drama. It'd clearly require some creative ingenuity from Rockstar to pull off smoothly, but I'd be totally down to walk a mile or two in old Hosea's well-paced boots across the frontier. One more candidate I can think of is Sadie Adler. Now, Sadie was definitely a scene stealer in Red Dead Redemption 2 as the tough-as-nails widow who joined up with Dutch's gang. Despite experiencing immense tragedy, she transformed from a homemaker into one of the gang's most capable and fearless gunslingers. The idea of playing as Sadie in a theoretical Red Dead 3 is really intriguing when you think about it. For one, she'd make for an absolute badass protagonist, a no-nonsense frontier woman who can shoot, hunt, and raise all kinds of hell with the best of them. Having her as the lead could open up some cool new gameplay possibilities too. Rather than just gunning down foes, Sadie's survivor skills could introduce more hunting, scavenging elements, or even rudimentary crafting to survive out in the wilderness. Her backstory provides the perfect narrative justification. They could even differentiate Sadie's combat style by having her be more of a stealthy, sharpshooting stalker, who lays deadly traps and takes enemies out from the shadows before they know what hit them. A straight-up female John Rambo taking on the criminal underworld? Yes, please. From a story perspective, there's definitely some weighty, unfinished business to explore with Sadie as well. By the epilogue in RDR 2, she had embraced a life of violence and bounty hunting after the horrors she endured. An entire saga further chronicling her one-woman vengeance quest across the frontier could be equal parts visceral power fantasy and sobering character study. You could have helter-skelter outlaw action intercut with more somber moments showing Sadie's fragile attempts to rebuild some semblance of normalcy, or confront her deep-rooted trauma. The duality could lead to a uniquely complex female protagonist rarely seen in mainstream action gaming. Of course, the potential stumbling blocks are unavoidable too. While Sadie's gruff personality and gunslinging skills are clear strengths, her more grounded nature could also inadvertently limit the overall gameplay scope compared to larger-than-life outlaw epics like Dutch's gang provided. There's also the timing problem. Sadie seemed pretty definitively retired and past her physical prime by the Red Dead 1 era in 1911. So they'd basically be shoehorned into cramming her adventure in the rapidly closing window of time between RDR 2's epilogue and John's tragic events. Of course, Rockstar would likely need to get creative with the time frame and incorporating other memorable side characters to avoid it feeling like a protracted epilogue tale. But you know what's most likely option is: a completely new character. Now I know some of y'all are hoping they'll focus the next game on existing characters we already know and love, like Sadie Adler, Charles Smith, or even Uncle making a grand return. And hey, I'm definitely down to see cameo appearances or supporting roles for those beloved heroes and outlaws. But here's the thing. Making one of those familiar faces the central lead character for RDR 3 just doesn't feel quite right to me. The Red Dead Redemption games have always been at their best when they're telling deep, morally complex, character-driven stories about redemption and atonement. We got to experience John Marston's brutal journey to make amends, before swapping over to Arthur Morgan's own path towards redemption in the prequel. Those emotional arcs of the protagonists trying to overcome their darkest sins is what made their tales so gripping. However, by the end of Red Dead Redemption 2's epilogue, it really seems like most of the remaining beloved characters like Sadie, Charles, and Jack Marston have hung up their gunslinging ways for good and found peace. Their personal arcs of corruption or redemption basically feel completed, you know? So let's say they did make Sadie the new playable lead. It'd be really hard for them to craft a brand new epic redemption story for her that doesn't feel forced or like treading old ground after everything she went through. Those big emotional journeys back from the brink have already kind of played out for her and the other survivors. That's why I think Red Dead Redemption 3 needs to rip off the metaphorical band-aid and introduce us to someone entirely new as the gunslinging protagonist. A mysterious outlaw or frontier dweller whose backstory and inner motivations are a total blank slate, just ripe for Rockstar to explore through their signature redemptive story lens. We were all skeptical about playing as the unknown Arthur Morgan after getting attached to John Marston first, but that risk paid off big time by allowing a rich, unexpected redemption arc to unfold before our eyes with Arthur's struggles. Just imagine how crazy it would be to experience an entire new era of Red Dead's Western lore and moral complexity through the deeply personal lens of a brand new playable character. Someone whose identity and capacity for redemption or irredeemable darkness is a total mystery box waiting to be unearthed. That's the good stuff. Of course, I'd love to see Xi surprise cameos or side roles for fan-favorite characters like Arthur or John's ghostly appearances or whatever. Just probably not on such a huge scale that their completed redemptive arcs overshadow the new protagonist's own make-or-break road to salvation or damnation. But yeah, that's why I'm convinced Red Dead Redemption 3 needs to pass the gunslinging baton to a total unknown again. Only by introducing a fresh face as the lead can Rockstar truly craft one of their mind-blowing, morally complex Western tales from a blank narrative slate, unburdened by pre-existing baggage or fan biases. Imagine Arthur showing up in Epilogue. That would be cool, AF. And that's enough for the video. Let me know in the comments who you want to see as the protagonist of the Red Dead Redemption 3, and I know there's lots of time for that, but still. I'll see you in the next video till then. Take care and have a nice day.